we're live. All right. Oh, here
All
come
right.
people.
Whoa,
Great.
viewers.
Hey,
Hello.
wonderful.
Dang. Wow. Sorry for being
Okay.
late, everybody.
Yeah, we're really sorry. We had a technical glitch. Those don't usually happen, but somehow. Um, for those just joining us, this is Seth Maskett, the host of the Smotus Report. And I promised you I'd give some post-election analysis on what happened in Colorado's primaries last night. I am really lucky to be joined today by the two co-hosts of the Get More Smarter podcast. So this is essentially a melding of two great Colorado institutions right now. It's like, I don't know, it's like combining the football stadium and the course field. It's beautiful. And the Get More Smarter podcast, if you're not listening to it yet, and you should be, it's probably the most popular Democratic-leaning podcast in Colorado politics. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for now. I mean, we'll see.
Okay, great. Yeah.
It's always time.
And my two hosts are Jason Bain and Ian Silveri. So Jason is a former journalist who has worked for many Democratic organizations, run many campaigns. He's the founder of the popular political website coloradopauls.com, currently works as a political consultant. My other guest is Ian Silveri, who is the founding partner of the Bighorn Company, which is a political and communications firm in Colorado. He's worked in Colorado politics for 15 years, including in the office of the Speaker of the State House, as well as with the Colorado House Majority Project. Gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for having us. I failed to update my bio. I've actually been doing this for 20 years now, which is insane to say out loud.
My bad.
Yeah. No, it's
20
good. 5 years goes fast. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be back on, and congrats on the release of your book, by the way. We had a great time at your launch party.
This old thing?
Yeah, that little guy. Yeah. It is relevant to today's conversation.
I'd show my book.
Well, thanks so much for that. Yeah. So we have a lot to discuss here. The Colorado's primaries are actually getting some national attention, which doesn't happen that often. In part because of the sort of left populist or progressive movement that we've seen happen in some other states, including New York last week. We're getting some evidence of that happening here as well. And so I wanted to get into what happened in some surprisingly competitive primaries. Not sure the best place to start, but we might as well start with the top of the ticket. And we've had two really interesting primaries in each party. We'll start with the Democratic side, because that side is almost certainly producing the actual next governor of Colorado. There was, of course, this is the contest that got a fair amount of attention. It was a contest between current Senator Michael Bennet and current Colorado Secretary of State Phil Weiser.
Attorney General.
Excuse me. Current Attorney General Phil Weiser. Okay, I already owe Phil some money there. Sorry about that. And this looked about, half a year ago, like a pretty easy one for Bennet, just simply due to his name recognition advantage, but it became a lot closer. And as of this point, Weiser is ahead, I think, by more than 10 points. Is that correct? And that it has been called for Phil Weiser.
Yep.
So, Ian, I want to go to you first on this. What has been your take on this election so far?
Well, first, an important disclaimer. I actually worked on the Weiser campaign through all of 2025. So they paid me to do work, and I did it with glee and joy, and it seems to have made a difference. So I just want to disclose that up top. We're actually going to have the AG on our show this Friday. So we'll have Phil Weiser come onto the Get More Smarter podcast. We're going to record with him on Friday, try and get it up as quickly as possible, just to bask in the glory with the guy a little bit. I mean, he had a great night. To your point, the race started out with Bennet releasing. First of all, Phil Weiser gets in on January 2nd. Then all of a sudden, rumors start swirling that because the most people thought the field was going to be some version of Phil Weiser, Jenna Griswold, Joe Neguse, maybe Ken Salazar. Nobody really knew Michael Bennet was going to run for governor, except for maybe Michael Bennet. But he gets in, I think, April, if I'm not mistaken, and nobody else gets in the race. So it becomes an instant head-to-head between the attorney general and a sitting U.S. senator for a governor's race, which is a pretty uncommon matchup, right? But one of the things that we can be proud of is that Jason and I on our podcast basically called this race from the very beginning. We kind of knew what the vibe was going to be, and we kind of knew that Phil was going to be able to take advantage of it, and we can talk about the reasons why. But I just wanted to start by saying, like, we did see this coming as far back
Okay.
as April of last year, not to the degree to which, and the margin was a surprise to me. Jason, I don't know
Yeah.
what your reactions are.
Yeah. The margin, I just looked, and as of right now, Weiser's up 11. That really, that surprises me. I expected, I think we even talked about it in our last podcast, that I thought this was going to be a 2 point race one way or the other. And when the final votes were counted, I did not see Weiser winning by this much. But I think what it showed me is the fundamentals still matter. Michael Bennett never really came up with a message other than vote Michael Bennett for governor because he's Michael Bennett. And that I don't think was enough, obviously. And I think I don't. There's a lot of uh, analysis out there that Phil Weiser is a benefited from the progressive surge, or he is the anti-establishment candidate. I don't think that was true. I just think he ran a better campaign and was more visible, and just he did the work and he won.
I don't know if folks can see this, but I'm going to put up my favorite bumper sticker from the race, which says Weiser for governor, Bennett for Senate. And I think this was a much clearer message than anything that came out of the Bennett campaign when it came to sort of asking, why are you doing this? No voter that I've talked to, or even people close to the campaign, could answer that very simple question with a very simple answer, other than, well, he doesn't like being in Washington very much. And that did not appear to be a good enough answer for this electorate in this election cycle. Meanwhile, you have Phil, who from the very beginning positioned himself as the fighter. And we know that, like, the dynamics at play in Democratic primaries across the country are not necessarily like center versus left. There's more of a fight versus fold, or an accommodate versus oppose, appease, however you want to put it. That seems to be the dividing line that is making voters choose sides in these elections. And the fact that Bennett comes in with a huge amount of name ID, gets a lot of endorsements from sitting elected officials up and down the ballot, including all of the state's congressional delegates, walking into this race as the presumptive frontrunner. I think the Weiser campaign, knew that, like, that support was an inch deep and a mile wide from the very beginning. And what they needed to do was drive the contrast. And I think they did so expertly with one very important unifying message. Michael Bennett has voted for 8 of Donald Trump's worst nominees in this term, and I sue the living crap out of this administration every chance I get. And now I'm up to 66, and I'm basically winning most of them. That, to me, was the contrast that seemed to, on the front end of the race, be something that would stick. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves.
I also think, to your bumper sticker, one of the things that the Bennett campaign was really nervous about was that message that Bennett should stay in the Senate. And I think they overcorrected by not doing some basic things. Like, I was surprised that in the last 3-4 months, Bennett never got on the Senate floor and gave a fiery anti-Trump speech.
We talked about waiting for this
easy.
for months. Yeah.
An easy thing to do. And you could have turned that into an ad.
Yeah.
But they were so afraid of the idea that that would be used to say, see, he should stay in the Senate, that and that was sort of too inside baseball of a thing. I think they would have been better off just using the position to talk about, to rail on Trump, and then put that into ads. I think that would have worked better for him.
Can I ask you, and Jason, this goes a little bit against something you were saying before. It seemed like when Bennett jumped into this race, he was kind of running as, to be the establishment candidate in a positive way. That is, he immediately got the endorsement of Hickenlooper. He got the endorsement of 3 sitting members of Congress, members of the House. He had a lot of labor backing. I would think in most years that's the right move. That just sort of shows your acceptability within the party, and that thanks to I think more of a surge on the left, change in the national environment and the state environment, that was a less positive thing, and that made him more vulnerable. And I think Phil was good at leveraging that and saying, "See, there's the insider. That's the insider candidate because he's attached to the party in D.C. Even though." The sitting attorney general is not exactly an outsider, and there's,
right.
There's not a ton of difference between those two guys. Do you think that in a different political environment, if this race were in, say, 2022, do you get the same outcome?
I think fundamentals, again, still matter. You still have to have a message. And that's where I think Bennett really struggled. There was, his message seemed to be Phil Weiser doesn't sue enough, and I also don't like Trump. And
it was also like it was muddled because it was Phil Weiser didn't sue enough this time, but now he's suing way too much. And there's like a Goldilocks zone of lawsuits that like is unavailable to achieve as an attorney general when you set that as the standard, because all Phil had to do was say, am I not suing him enough now? When it really matters, when we live here, when things are on the line. And I just think that you could tell that the Bennett negative message wasn't landing just on a gut level, because they kept going at it over and over and over again and never got to pivot back to a closing message, right? Like I was sitting there. And the other thing that I think we should talk about here is that there were $11.5-ish million on the independent side from Super PAC supporting Michael Bennett. Most of it, if not half of it, from New York City former Mayor Michael Bloomberg. That was supposed to come in and kind of like scorch the earth against Weiser, while Bennett was doing the sort of like, hey, remember, I'm a great guy who has been in office here for 16 years and you love Michael Bennett. The problem is there wasn't, to Jason's point, not only was there not a great message from Michael Bennett saying, here's why you should vote for me, there wasn't a sticky negative against Phil. They were forcing this, you didn't sue enough the first time and you missed out on the family separation thing and now you're just suing because you want to be governor. That doesn't sort of compute for most voters, I don't think.
So I was asked... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. To answer your question about 2022, I think it would have been close. It would have been a 2-3 point race.
Okay.
But all things being equal, I think Weiser would have still won.
I don't think I had anybody calling this thing in double digits. I ran a couple of friendly wager, non-monetary pools out there in the world, and most people were like Bennett or Weiser by like 4 or 6 if you were getting real spicy. 11 was not on the table for anybody who I talked to.
Yeah, this was interesting. I was asked this by a journalist last night. Did Governor Jared Polis commuting the sentence of Tina Peters, could that have hurt Bennett in the sense that it smeared the establishment even more, and anyone who was even vaguely, affiliated with Polis just looked worse as a result of that? Is that a plausible effect, do you think?
I think it played a role in a lot of races where a lot of Democratic primaries. It's hard to assign too many specifics to it, but I do think it just did create that these Democrats that we're more familiar with kind of suck. And Polis did that.
And I think, Bennett knew that was probably the case, because the second he announced it, everybody and their mother came out and said, no, don't, that's bad. Don't do that, including Bennett, including Weiser. They all sent out press releases. They all said Tina Peters belongs in jail. John Hickenlooper, I think, just kept saying she's guilty as sin. And that stuck with me because he just had this line about it. But I'm sure they wish he didn't, or at least waited until after the primary, because I think the effect that it had on the sort of more enthusiasm building part of the electorate was like, well, that is, can I curse on this show?
Yeah.
Well, that's fucking it. I am done with these guys who have been in office for too long. We're out. And that creates turnout enthusiasm that may not have been there otherwise. So that's where I think it actually played into the mathematics of the race.
So you guys have you've talked a fair amount about Bennett's messaging or lack thereof. And I heard him running, and I was sympathetic to the idea. I'm sick of working in the Senate. It sucks. I would rather have a 2-mile commute than a 2,000-mile commute. I know that's not a great thing that will resonate with voters. That's much more of a workplace thing. Is there a message you think he could have used in this race that just would have resonated more, that would have captured more interest?
This is where I get back to, I would have been on the Senate floor railing against Trump.
That seems like an obvious layup there, yeah.
What a lot of Bennett's mail and other messages were like, well, Bennett opposes Trump. Okay, but how? And what? What did he do? And they could have used those visuals to say, see, look at, here he is yelling about Trump, or whatever. And I can compare that with a lot of Hickenlooper's ads in the last month. They did a really good job of showing Hickenlooper kind of out in the wild instead of just instead of staged. sort of standing on a mountain or in a field like most of them do. They showed him at rallies or at events or in interviews, and it made his anti-Trump message seem much more authentic.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that Bennett should have copied.
One has to think about the order of operations in Bennett's mind, and I don't pretend to know them, but when did he decide to run for governor, and when did he decide to start and stop casting votes for Trump nominees? Because if he knew he was running for governor to begin with, one could imagine that he would have voted for many fewer of them, especially like Doug Burgum, Secretary of Interior, who wants to sell off all the public lands. That is like anathema to Colorado. Brooke Rollins with the USDA cuts to SNAP benefits. That's just like a layup for anybody going up against you saying, what were you thinking on this one? And then Chris Wright, who's a straightforward climate change denier. I mean, these are the people, not the people that you want to surround yourself with when pursuing a Democratic nomination anywhere for any office, let alone here in the U.S. Senate in 2026.
I think
Yeah.
Bennett also should have said that was a mistake. Instead, what he did is say, oh, well, I did this because it's important to have a line into these offices. And people don't know that I'm fighting for Colorado by calling them in the morning or whatever. I mean, he would say something to that degree. And instead, he should have just said, I thought these people told me they would be a check on Trump. They lied to me. I regret that vote. And I think that would have worked better with voters.
Yeah, and I think what he was saying, his rationale was that like not voting against all these people that are so relevant to Colorado gives me actually easier access to them, and I can talk to them and get stuff from. Like, I think that's a reasonable approach to governing. That's a very hard message to sell to primary voters. Yeah.
To say nothing of the fact that like they're still stripping the state for parts. The all-out assault on Colorado did not stop because he voted for some nominees. Like Donald Trump got rid of our National Renewable Energy Laboratory and is like pulling investments. He won't fund the wildfire aid that we so badly need at this exact moment. Like there's a lot to all of that. But I think like very simply, just like zooming back out, you had the fighter. Phil was able to position himself as the one who has taken the fight to Trump the best. And to Jason's point, a friend of our pod who either should be or will soon be a friend of yours, Kyle Clark from 9 News, coined the nickname the cicada of confrontation for Michael Bennett because every 7 years or so he pops up and like really lets like fucking Ted Cruz or RFK Jr. or somebody have it. And there was the RFK committee moment that I think Bennett's team did a pretty good job of socializing and getting out there. But to Jason's point, why not do one of those a week? This week it's RFK Jr. Next week
it's free.
Doug Burgum. Like you're already there. They're walking around in an empty chamber half the time. They're not like making laws in the United States Senate for the most part. So just like take the opportunity,
Yeah, 100%. So maybe we've exhausted this race for now. Those of you watching, Michael Bennett lost that primary. However, he remains in the U.S. Senate. His term is not up until 2028. Phil Weiser is the new Democratic nominee for governor in Colorado. He presumably becomes Colorado's governor in January, except he has to get past whatever Republican results from this contest, which we can get into. That will not be a hard thing. But so the Colorado Republican primary has also gotten some national attention and has been really kind of fascinating and silly in a lot of different ways. Three candidates in that. The one who is doing worst is state legislator Scott Bottoms. He's very sort of far-right figure within the state legislature. He's a big believer in pedophile conspiracy theories and allegedly was going to blow the doors on this once he became governor. And sadly, we'll just never know who the pedophiles were. But the other two positions were the somewhat more moderate State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer, closer to the center of her party, wherever that party is now. And then, of course, the kind of outsider Victor Marx, the self-described high-risk humanitarian, claims to have killed some X number of people out there in defense, while rescuing tens of thousands of women and children all over the world. That race, as we are speaking, is down to about 1,300 votes statewide. Victor Marx is ahead of Barb Kirkmeyer about a 0.3 percentage points. And there's still, I believe, about 20% of the vote to cast. I don't have a great sense of what the remaining votes look like. But just going to you guys, Was this a result so far that you were anticipating? How much of this race has surprised you?
So sorry to correct you again,
Oh.
but this is probably because I put something misleading in the outline.
What did I do?
Barb is currently up 1,300 on marks, not the other way around. So she is currently leading by a very small amount. It's
sorry.
0.3%. You're good.
Okay,
It's
man. No,
0.3%
I'm not clearly, but okay.
A couple of things I think are important to mention here. One, unlike the dynamics in the first congressional district, which we'll get to in a minute, Bottoms spoiled the anti-establishment lane for Marks. If Bottoms were not in this race, Marks would be the nominee running away. I don't know if all 20 points go right to Marks, but more of them go there than
20 is way more than I would have thought for Bottoms. 20%.
Yes, and to vote for a guy like Scott Bottoms, you have to be like pilled to the gills. To vote for a guy like Victor Marks, you merely need to be like out of touch with reality. And like again, like the funny things you said about these guys are all true. Again, Kyle Clark like went to Scott Bottoms in the Capitol and said like, you have evidence that there are children being harmed around here. Like, please produce it so we can help you stop them. And he just wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it because it doesn't exist. Victor Marks, to your point, says, I think Kyle said like he has either lived one of the most extraordinary human lives in history, or you're making stuff up and you're a con artist and a fraud. And I think it's pretty obvious which one of those is true. I want to set on something you said, and then I'll shut up and let Jason talk. Barb Kirkmeyer is a little bit of a anomaly here. She kind of exists in a superposition politically because in the building as a state senator, she is a member of the budget committee and is widely seen as somebody who knows what she's doing, can help balance a budget, does so in a bipartisan way, works across the aisle, and I think she deserves those accolades. However, she also did lead a movement to try and secede part of Colorado from the state and either join Wyoming or form a 51st
and admitted to voting for it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So for the first time in this election cycle, I believe, right, Jason? Like she never actually said she voted for it before this campaign.
I think she mentioned it once last fall, but yeah.
So yeah, like, so running a little different from her past.
Crazy.
Yeah. But it was interesting, you know, I'm sure she's full well aware of what her party looks like, what Republican primary voters look like in Colorado these days. And she chose to present herself publicly as kind of the numbers person, the accountant type. Just the reliable insider who knows how to get things done. That's probably a good way to distinguish her from her opponents. But I was somewhat surprised that she was emphasizing that and not so much her sort of more bomb-throwing past, which seems maybe more in tune with Republican voters.
I think that's where the secession vote came in. I think you say, I voted for secession so that you can get the crazy people in the primary to support you. It was like, hey, wait, don't forget about me. I'm also nuts. Like that was how I took that. For Marks, I think it comes down to, again, some of the fundamentals. He raised something like $2.5 million, didn't really do paid media buy. He spent a lot of money on random stuff like, he spent like $50,000 on campaign swag, like shirts and things like that.
Budget, like Victor Marks flag everywhere. Yeah.
And, he paid his family, his daughter and his son a lot of money to do whatever they did. If Victor Marks had, just shut up a couple of weeks ago and B, done some basic stuff, like just do a TV buy that covers Colorado Springs, he'd have walked into this nomination.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's interesting that like Barb positioned herself as the sort of like normie numbers Republican and ends up either winning or coming very, very close to winning. We'll find out maybe tomorrow. This nomination, when the Republican Party in Colorado has been just so politically non-competitive for going on a decade here because they just all went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like the Bottoms Marks 60% of the vote is truly representative of that portion of the party because 40% of them are kind of like your chamber Republicans, normal conservative types. The rest of them have just gotten their brains destroyed by Donald Trump and other nonsense.
Yeah. So with Victor Marks, he said he did not spend a lot. He did not have much of an advertising budget. He just wasn't spending on paid media. He picked up a lot of earned media basically by saying a lot of insane things, and by Kyle Clark giving very widely reposted interview that went viral. Some debate clips went viral. He got a lot of coverage on John Oliver's show, and just was kind of the talk and national political nerd scene for a while there. Do we think did this help Marks or hurt him in the Republican primary?
I think it absolutely hurt him.
Yeah. You think it hurt him?
I think it hurt him. I think because it showed a different level of nuttery. We knew, because we're political dorks and we really follow this stuff, that Victor Marks is a grifter, and he's completely full of shit, has no idea what he would do as governor, or even how any of this stuff works. But I don't think anybody else, particularly Republicans, understood the level of craziness. Like when Kyle Clark in that interview said, "How many people have you killed?" and he paused for like 15 seconds. I mean, like that. What do you do it?
What an amazing 15 seconds, though. Like, yeah.
He paused for 15 seconds and then said, "Well, do you mean when I was 7 or after that?" Like he had to ask a clarifying question about his
I've only killed one as a child. Like, oh, all right.
Yes, and then asked for clarify. He said, "Does it matter how many people I've killed as an adult?" Like,
yeah. Kyle Clark just goes, "I'd say so."
It kind of does. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. I can I answer your question in the insane and two answers that are conflicting with each other kind of way?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think it helped him and then it hurt him. Like I think it helped him by raising his profile super duper fast across the state, and like a lot of people who never heard of this guy before, like all of a sudden were like, "Oh, cool. He can take a gun away from a bad guy. I like that. He likes Jesus. I like Jesus. Like this seems like a good dude." But then to Jason's point, like once the true level of insanity crossed the acceptable level threshold on the right, which in Colorado is pretty high, I think that it really did end up hurting him. And whether or not Kirkmeyer's campaign participated in that or benefited from it intentionally or otherwise, I think he would have run away with it, to Jason's point, if he just like focused on a few fundamentals and just like
he never had another message. He didn't pivot from that and say, no, I'm not that crazy. He just let it go.
No, kind of leaned in on it. One thing I was thinking about there, and this is, I'm going to plug my book again. This is obnoxious.
Do it. Elephants in the room.
The elephants in the room. So in my book, one of the things I do is I look at support for Trump across 2023 among local Republican leaders. And I got some pretty decent evidence in there that Trump's various indictments helped him. That he was good at leveraging that support. It was like proof that everything he'd been saying about how the system's against him, everyone's out to get him. And that actually, there were a lot of Republicans who saw that and said, "Oh, my guy's in trouble. Whatever concerns I have with him, I've got to stand by him right now." And I was sort of wondering if that kind of thing would help Victor Marks, in the sense that they can see that, oh, wow, all the liberal mainstream media is making fun of our guy. Should we rush and defend him? Now, I don't think Marks has that kind of connection with voters that Donald Trump does.
He didn't try
Not by a long shot. Yeah. And there's not that, I don't know that there's that many politicians who could pull that off and just turn like really negative coverage into a positive among their voters.
He didn't need to do that though. He just said, "Hey, look, other people are talking about me." Like it was good. He didn't.
Yeah, it was. He wasn't able to operationalize it in a way that you would use to like persuade a voter to turn out for you, right? Or so I agree completely. And I also just I think that's an important passage in your book, and I really thought it was fascinating. And I think the second order analysis on it is like Trump convinced a lot of his voters that they're actually going after you, and I'm in their way. Mm-hmm. And Mark never had an ability to try and attempt that kind of like avatar sort of.
Right. They're accusing you of killing a person when you were 7 years old. That didn't really sell. Right.
Like I am like the name brand lunatic in this race, and because the Colorado Republican Party is into that at the moment, like I'm gonna get a plurality of the vote, and like he might be right.
I will say too, I don't know that any of this actually matters to Marks. I don't think this was about him being governor. I think this was about him raising money and raising his name among the religious right that donates to him. I think, becoming the Republican nominee for governor was the cherry on top of his sundae.
Hmm. Hmm. So again, this race is currently it's still holding at about 1,300 votes. We don't know which way this is going to go at this point. If Victor Marx pulls this off, there's a reasonable chance of that, and he becomes the Republican nominee. Does that split the party? Do we think that? And because one of the things that really struck me about watching the debate between these three candidates at the University of Denver, I was sitting right there, and both Scott Bottoms and Kirkmeyer said on stage, if this man becomes the nominee, I will not support him. And which is kind of wild to hear. You don't often hear that in a party primary. So could they back a third party candidate for governor? Could they just say, I'm backing Republicans all down the ticket, except what do we think?
I guess you can't rule it out. It's still early. I don't know if there's any unaffiliateds on the ballot. I guess they have a little bit of time left where they could collect signatures and get on as a U, or there's a third party nomination process like the American Constitution Party. I think what you're referring to is the 2010 governor's race in Colorado, where Tom Tancredo ended up running as the American Constitution Party candidate because they nominated a freak called Dan Mays against a normie Republican called Scott McGinnis, who ended up in a plagiarism scandal and all sorts of nasty stuff. So his stock fell. Mays, a sort of police officer from Kansas nobody had ever heard of, walked on stage and got the nomination somehow. And then this was their attempt to try and still win the general. That was a very different, that's 2010. We're talking 16 years later. That was a very different Colorado Republican Party and a very different conservative ecosystem.
There were still adults in the room today.
Absolutely. And they could win elections.
Was the party chair.
They could win. The state was competitive. Yeah.
And in 2010, it was a red wave year. And John Hickenlooper was the nominee from the Democrats, kind of coronated that year, didn't have much of a primary going into that race. And, we ended up winning both the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race that year, but it was only because of the lack of candidate equality on the Republican side, where Democrats were getting wiped out across the country.
And in 2010, Republicans had more of a party infrastructure. The party chair was Dick Wadhams, who had won races before. He managed the last Republican Senate candidate to win. I was watching some of the coverage on 9 News last night, and they put up the new Republican state party chair to talk about some stuff. I didn't know what he looked like. I don't even know what his name is. It was like he was just appointed, I don't know, like a month ago. There's nobody around in the Colorado Republican Party who could possibly organize something like this.
They raised $3,000 last quarter as a party. That is it. I think I see Fish in the chat here, and Fish is the one who raised this for all of us. Yeah, it's not enough. And to Jason's point, like just the entire conservative and Republican apparatus in Colorado has essentially surrendered on candidate elections and moved all of their resources and firepower into ballot initiative campaigns, both on the offensive and defensive side. That's a little bit beside the point of this conversation, but they do still exist. They just focus on ballot initiatives and like unaffiliated candidates, like in city councils and school boards, rather than like partisan races that they're just going to get crushed in all over the place.
Wow. Okay. Up for moving on to the next race?
Yeah, but real quick, just to your question, I don't think the party splits if Marx is there. I think they just lose by a bigger margin to Phil Weiser.
Yes.
And he hurts the whole rest of the ticket much more than Barb Kirkmeyer does.
Right. So like Gabe Evans, with absolutely no top of the ticket coattails, running all by himself in the most competitive congressional district in Colorado and one of the top 3 or 5 in the whole country, without any kind of turnout surge coming from anywhere else on the ticket, is going to have a really hard time hanging on to that seat.
I asked also in my capacity at the University of Denver if it becomes a general election contest between Phil Weiser and Victor Marx. Is there a debate? I mean, I would love to watch it, but
if I were Phil, I would be I would line up 10 of them. I mean, it's
Okay.
hard to think of a. You're talking about a constitutional lawyer who clerked for Ruth Bader Ginsburg and just beat a sitting U.S. senator. I don't think Phil has anything to be afraid of. I also don't think there's
Fair.
much to gain from it. So, like, he might do it performatively. He might decide this guy's not serious. I'm going to be the governor. I'm just going to go talk to voters. It's a good
No,
question.
I would do it. I would do it.
I would do it just because
you let Mark
fun.
talk. You just get out of the way.
Yeah,
it's that old yarn about don't, if your opponent's making a mistake, don't interrupt them.
Yeah.
Right. It's the old art of war. Yeah.
And does Phil bring his own service animal on stage?
Excellent.
Yeah.
The people you must be referring to the people's pooch, Zeke, who's a wonderful, I believe, Labradoodle. And a great.
I was thinking of Victor Marx's dog.
Marx's dog.
Oh, the one that went
Reagan.
hysteria. And
The one that was on the stage at the debate. For
The unimpeachable Reagan the dog, yes.
Maybe the dogs could debate.
Okay. I would love to move to the first congressional district race, because this has gotten a lot of national news attention overnight. In some ways, like the biggest upset. This is, of course, this was the incumbent Democratic member of Congress, Diana DeGette, who has been in the seat literally 30 years. Lost to a younger woman, Melat Kiros, who was literally born during Diana DeGette's first term in office. So Kiros is a 29-year-old lawyer, member of Democratic Socialists, and was probably most famous prior to that to getting fired from her law firm for putting up a post that was very critical of Israel. And this is, again, mea culpa. A few months ago, I thought that Diana DeGette would be able to weather this storm. She's weathered lots of other primary challenges. The fact that there was a third candidate in the race, Wanda James, kind of splitting the anti-establishment vote, I thought maybe that would save DeGette. But no, Kiros, as at this point, Kiros has been beating DeGette by almost 10 points. Which is really quite striking. So, yeah, I'm curious to hear y'all's take on this race.
This was, I would say, a surprise, but not a surprise in some ways. DeGette's defeat was inevitable eventually, because she had been...
Well, all our defeats are inevitable eventually, but yeah.
On a long enough time.
She had survived longer than she probably should have, because she didn't do a whole lot in the district. She didn't do much for other Democrats. And she didn't have a buffer of goodwill to help her in a difficult primary. She also fell asleep. They did not take this as seriously as they should have when Kiros won the assembly and almost kept DeGette off the ballot. I think DeGette for so long had faced insurgent challenges from the left that were not all that serious, and she always won. And the combination, I think, of anger about Trump and anger about older elected officials and DeGette's just general absence in the district made this a perfect opportunity for someone like Kiros.
A couple of things. We also called this one wrong. We're almost addicted to the fact that in Colorado, winning the assembly generally actually is a better predictor of losing the election than it is of winning the election.
Caucus assembly is the kiss of death. Yeah.
Right. We're like steeped in history here. And we've seen this movie a billion times. Right? Like Andrew Romanoff runs against both Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper in various election years, gets top of the ticket, huge reception, tons of grassroots energy in the assembly, and then gets slaughtered.
Scott Bottoms on the Republican side won the assembly.
Right, exactly. So like it's almost a better predictor, or until last night, it was a better directional predictor of failure than success. So we kind of launched onto that. We latched onto what Jason said about the fact that she has faced plenty of left-wing challengers over the years, some of whom mounted real campaigns, some of whom were just names on a ballot, and has dispatched with them all fairly easily. But I also think there's something that's worth noting here. Two things. One, the fundamentals, like Jason said about the other race, also mattered here, where Kiros ran a very good race. To come out of fucking nowhere as a 29-year-old winning assembly against a sitting 30-year member of Congress, almost knocking her off the ballot in both the county assembly and the district assembly back in April, right? You have to go to 3 all-day meetings, 3 Saturdays in a row in order to participate in these things. But they organized the living daylights out of that thing and almost kept to get off the ballot to begin with. That was the warning sign. And I disagree slightly because I do think the DeGette campaign started taking things very seriously after almost getting knocked off the ballot. But they didn't really figure out the combination of positives and negatives they needed to run and the contrast overall in order to seal the deal here. Last night, this was a lot closer. In the cold light of morning, 10 points, that almost feels like there aren't many tactical or strategic decisions the campaign could have made that would have changed the outcome. 10 points is kind of weather versus like the ability to navigate weather. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's stuff DeGette should have done 10 years ago at that point.
Mm.
Yeah, and I agree that she was the most vulnerable in the state to a challenge like this, right? So think of it this way. John Hickenlooper, top of the ticket, in his 70s, like, centrist, not exactly a democratic socialist, gets primaried by Julie Gonzalez, a popular state senator in Denver, who is sort of in the DSA and sort of not in the DSA, sort of superposition, socialist-ish candidate.
DSA curious.
Right. Doesn't raise a ton of money to Hickenlooper's $5 million war chest. He's got the long-standing brand name. She doesn't. And on the same statewide general election ballot, John Hickenlooper beats Gonzalez by 10 points, 11 points, which is not a slaughter, but it's decisive and definitive. Whereas, and then Weiser and Bennett end up in the same sort of 10-point spread. So, I think that everything Jason said is true, generally speaking, but Quiros had incredible timing, ran the kind of race that she needed to run tactically in order to activate this dormant or soon to be enthusiastic group of voters that went to bat for her. And here we see the results. And she's feeling herself right now. She's out there with kind of victory lap ads on Instagram and other platforms. And quite frankly, she's earned it. She ran a hell of a race to sneak up on a 30-year incumbent like that and then win by double digits. You got to give credit at least to the operational side of things.
I mean, Quiros, I could, just my impression in Denver, she put a lot of shoe leather into this. She was at a lot of places and a lot of events, showed up at a lot of different parts of town. My impression of her is, she's obviously young, obviously does not have governing experience, very engaging, very bright. She's, even if you might find her, her policy stance is too left for you, but she can explain them very persuasively. I just part of it as this is a very talented candidate, and I think
for sure.
And
but something else worth pointing out is that.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, something else worth pointing out is that both in Denver and in Colorado and nationally, DSA and Working Families Party and some other affiliated left-wing organizations focused in on this race and recruited a ton of volunteers to do phone banking and text banking, and people showed up here. Hassan Piker came here twice, launching canvases, doing events, generating that on-the-ground enthusiasm. I do not believe any similar contrary force was put to play for DeGette other than advertising dollars, right? So if you have all this human being energy, people talking to people who are doing this on a volunteer basis out of the goodness of their heart because they really care about the outcome of this election and care about this candidate, that will overwhelm an advertising budget almost every time.
Well, and there was a good visual, I thought, when I was watching the local TV channels. One of them, I can't remember which one, was at the DeGette watch party early on. And in the background, there's 5 80-year-old people milling around. And that was, and pretty much nobody else. And it
looked like the National Mall right now. Yeah.
The 250 fair,
So, but that image spoke volumes.
What is it that made DeGette so vulnerable in this? Now, I mean, I'll just say it was a rough year for incumbents generally. She's been there for 30 years. She really hasn't done anything particularly wrong, although probably a lot of people have a hard time pointing to good things she's done either. I can't think of, there's not a whole lot of pork projects in the district that have her name on them. She's not really affiliated with,
associated with any particular legislative campaigns, except a lot of abortion rights stuff from 20 years ago. What made her vulnerable?
She was an impeachment manager, and
Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay.
I think that's it. I mean,
You were talking before about like Michael Bennet could have done things as an incumbent to improve his standing, and I'm wondering if there are things DeGette could have done as well along that. Not she was a great public speaker, but
she needed to be different than she had been for the. I mean, she just did the same thing she's always done, and that was enough in previous.
Usually works.
It wasn't enough now.
Yeah,
I do think it's worth mentioning that Diana DeGette is like a champion for reproductive rights and justice way before it was cool, like threw down on stem cell research when it was super controversial, like made some really important moves on public health. She was an original sponsor of Medicare for All. Like she got, and when AOC and Bernie came through Denver and did their Fight Oligarchy tour, they did this big, we love Diana DeGette because she's a Progressive Caucus member and she's going to Medicare for All and all these things. And I just don't think it was enough. I think, she was the one out of the whole delegation, because all the other members of the delegation are under 50. She's over 70. She was the one that was susceptible to like this particular moment's political problems for Democratic incumbents, right? Which is that, a younger, more exciting, more energetic candidate can prosecute the case that you've been in for too long. You're part of why we got Trump back. And if it's like you were an impeachment manager, I think it's a fair criticism to say, yes, and you got him impeached in the House, but now he is president again. So that didn't exactly work. And that's fair, and that's fair play. And like I said, on the fundamentals, on the nuts and bolts, Kuros and her campaign and her team saw an opportunity, built the operation, took it on, and won. And I think that is pure effort and not luck.
The other thing that came back to bite DeGette, she is notorious for never endorsing another Democrat in Colorado. For years, she refused to. Decades, she wouldn't do that. And so when she was finally in trouble and calling for help, I think a lot of Democrats were like, "Yeah, sure. Where were you when I needed you 10 years ago or 5 years?" She had no goodwill built up among Democrats that and I think, again, you saw that in her watch party. Like, there's just nobody showed up just to be there for her because she hadn't built that up.
I do think it's a shame that like Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi at the beginning of the cycle like saw the writing on the wall, or maybe they had good timing and they were like, we're going to take our accolades and our accomplishments with us, and we're going to bow out gracefully, and we're going to let this primary occur and do its thing. It's going to be an open seat, and the next generation gets to play for it. And that's that. And I think, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, which is, easier than saying so at the front end, like it might have been the year for older, Democrats to have bowed. Like Ed Perlmutter in 2022 was kind of like, you know what? I made my point. I've been here a long time. Time to get out. Let the new generation in.
Yeah. So just watching Milad Kiros's victory speech last night, watching some of the coverage of it, it was actually reminding me a good deal about like coverage of AOC on primary night in 2018. Just sort of, this young woman, very energetic, powerful speaker, is suddenly getting a lot of national attention. This first real job in politics. Do you see, is now she the face of the Democratic Party? Like everyone gets a turn for 15 minutes, but, will national reporters be dissecting everything Kiros ever said? How do you see that playing out over the next few months?
Republicans are absolutely going to try and make that the case, because she does have some pretty out there views on a couple of things, and she has misstepped on a few, I would argue, pretty easy questions. The one that I think is coming to mind for all three of us, because we've observed this race, is when Kyle Clark asked her, was the firebombing of Jewish demonstrators on the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder an act of anti-Semitism? And she didn't answer the question twice in a row. She said, well, I can't say because I don't know what's in his heart. There's no universe in which a firebombing of a black church wouldn't be automatically...
Oh, and the guy...
races.
The guy who did it said what was in his heart. He said it out loud.
There's also that, right?
So it wasn't a mystery.
But I
No,
think
that
like
was bad answer. That was very
that's
bad.
a
Yeah.
misstep and a mistake versus a like fundamental mismatch. Like
Right.
she's probably going to get a ton of attention. The more attention you get, the more chances there are for you to make missteps and mistakes. So like the Fox News and Newsmax and all the right wing in people in DC when she gets sworn in will like follow her around the camera and try and provoke her into saying things they can then use and take out of context and hit every other Democrat with. She seems pretty smart, just like wattage wise. So I don't know if it'll work, but to your question, I do think they will certainly try. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah.
Is there more to her than I'm not Diana to get? That's what I'm waiting to see, because that was all she had to do for a long time. Now it needs to be, okay, can you actually get something done? Are you just gonna yell a lot? And can she has a few months now to make a case for herself to try to prevent a primary of her own in 2 years. And she's going to have to do that pretty quickly. She's going to have to show that she can be more than a DSA flash in the pan in a primary. And that's where, when the lights come on brighter, does she have a different gear?
There is another thing that I think is worth mentioning here, which is that one of the reasons why DeGette lasted as long as she did is because anybody serious, quote unquote, an established state representative or city councilor in Denver or state senator or something said, I'm just going to wait my turn. And then when the big mosh pit primary happens after DeGette bows out and it's an open seat, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to compete and I'm going to win. They were all robbed of that opportunity, essentially, by Kuros winning the surprise primary against DeGette. So there's a giant group of Democrats in Denver who saw themselves as the successor to DeGette one way or another, who now have to either say, well, it's still my turn and I'm going to run against Kuros now because I'm the one who should be here, or well, shit, now a 29-year-old is in there and I am not going to be able to mount an offense to that. So she's going to have that seat for a while. And we'll have to see. I mean, it's the day after and no
I
one's
think it'll be the
challenged her yet.
former.
Yeah.
I think people will run. I don't think they'll wait.
There's just a lot of pent up energy, a lot of pent up talent and potential in the city of Denver. And it, at the moment, only has one congressional district.
Yep. Let's shift to another congressional district, if we can, the 8th, because this was a hot contest. And just for the listeners, what makes this district so particularly important is it's one of the most competitive congressional districts in the country. This was a district created just prior to the 2022 electoral cycle. It was designed to be very competitive, roughly equal numbers Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters in it. And the first person to win it, Democrat Yadira Caraveo, she wins it by less than 1 point. The next person to win it, Republican Gabe Evans, he also wins it by less than 1 point. So this is something that, I would just assume in this apparently pretty blue-leaning year, this is something that likely swings back in the Democratic direction. But possibly it's somewhat contingent on who the Democrats picked for their nominee. And in that case, we had really a two-way race, Manny Rutinel and Shannon Byrd. Manny Rutinel won, I would say, was more of the progressive left candidate, although did distance himself from a number of his previous stances, but is currently beating her by almost 2-1. It's a very large disparity. You guys see this one coming? What do you make of this?
I was not at all surprised that Manny won. I'm surprised a bit by the margin, but the writing was on the wall here. Manny's campaign and his supporters used a vote that Shannon Byrd took in the legislature in 2025 that you could squint and say was against pushing back against ICE enforcement, and they beat that message, and it clearly hurt Byrd in a way that she couldn't get away from. And the other thing that I think was interesting to watch in the last month, particularly, Manny ran more to the middle. He became more of a centrist, and that combination, I think, put him in, and also the Hispanic vote really coming through in 2026. You got Amanda Gonzalez for Secretary of State winning by 30 points. In a race where neither candidate had much money or much spending. I think a combination of these things really made it hard for Rutenell to lose.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. We had all three candidates, because there were three on the ballot, actually,
Right.
as voters saw them, including Evan Munsing, a former Marine kind of outsider guy who came in and just didn't quite catch on. Both public polls and the final result had Munsing at 5%. So he had a 5% floor throughout this entire race and just like lived there, which is weird because he fell off. Like he stopped running. He was still on the ballot and he got 3,300 votes. So just worth noting. I agree with Jason that it was the margin was pretty surprising. I thought it'd be a lot closer. I thought Rutenell would win because fundamentally Bird had basically gone dark. Both the independent group supporting her and her campaign itself had basically stopped communicating over the last 2 weeks. And Manny just raised a real huge war chest and took it to work and did great ads. The other thing I'll say, just to emphasize a point Jason made about that ICE vote, whether or not you think that was like a perfectly fair hit or whatever, it also played into an important identity contrast in the district. This is the only plurality minority district in Colorado. It is drawn to be a Hispanic seat. And Manny Rutenell, with his background and his mom and her story told in contrast to Shannon's ICE vote, was a version of the message, this is personal for me. And she betrayed this community. And in this year, I think that was very, very potent.
He was also just fundamentally more interesting than Bird in terms of how they were portrayed. You know, Bird would just, Bird just stood there and said, I'm a fighter. And that was kind of it. And Manny told a story about himself. And stories win in campaigns.
And he was sophisticated on social media. He had huge followings across all platforms. He's great looking. Like, that's not in doubt. There's an objective
That's not
fact.
nothing. That's
And I mean, if you stack up every candidate who has ever run, the better looking ones tend to beat the less good looking ones. That's just a weird fact of American politics. So I think all these things going together. To your question, though, for the general in 2026, does it matter? Here's the history of the district. It was created in 2021. Yadira Caraveo wins it by about 1,300 votes in 2022. Gabe Evans, that's the Democrat, the first person who represented the district. She loses to Gabe Evans in 2024 by about 1,300 votes. And now Manny is here with the wind at his back in the Democratic wave back last year. I think all things remaining equal, he'll probably be fine. He'll probably win. The question is, can he build enough of a base and do enough constituent services and have a good enough operation and get some accomplishments in Washington that he can bring home to the district to say, I deserve to be reelected? Because if he wins this year, this will be a fully pendulum district that, has never elected the same party twice in a row.
Just to go back to a point you were making about hotter candidates doing better, which I really don't want to be the case. But I was teaching a statistical methods class a few years ago. And one of the things I was using was trying to teach regression. I promise you I'll land this. And I was having people, design things that would predict election outcomes for presidential elections. Basically, does the in party win or does the out party win, by how much? And like one of the things that reliably predicts that is economic performance. So we had that in there. And I wanted to show them like a garbage variable. Like, what is something that definitely is not related to election outcomes that we could throw in? So just for fun, I designed this little program so students could rank all the modern presidents by hotness. Basically going back to Truman, I think. And all the presidential candidates, just by how hot they were. And it turns out it totally predicted the vote results. And I was really embarrassed. And I was like, this is not supposed to work. Do not take this away from this class. But yeah.
Don't forget, the last bald president was elected in 1952. So this country does still care about appearances.
52, 56, also running against another bald guy. But yeah.
Right. So that was the last time my people had any true representation.
Well, also, Jimmy Carter was the last president who was under 6 feet tall.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That kind of stuff matters. It's human nature. I think it's less politics than just human nature.
Fascinating. Okay. we're not going to settle human nature right now. But I'd like to pivot to the other, or one of the other big statewide races, the U.S. Senate race. This is where one of the incumbent senators, John Hickenlooper, was facing a pretty significant challenge from a state senator, Julie Gonzalez. It ended up with Hickenlooper winning by a little over 10 points at this point, and not that close. Now, Hickenlooper, for those of you not too familiar with Colorado politics, is kind of this remarkable story within the state in that he just wins stuff even in years that are difficult for his party. He won, in governor, he ran in 2010 and 2014, neither of which were really good years for Democrats.
And we lost the U.S. Senate race in 2014 on the same ballot to Cory Gardner with our candidate, Mark Udall, who was like there are two like Mr. Colorado candidates in modern Colorado history, John Hickenlooper and Mark fucking Udall. And Udall loses to Cory Gardner by 2 points when Hickenlooper kind of just walks back in 2014.
Yes, and I'm old enough to remember when John Hickenlooper was my mayor here in Denver for 2 terms, and he always had absurdly high approval ratings then, and always faced off challengers. And I recall some polling being run at the time. People in the suburb cities around Denver were giving Hickenlooper very high ratings. First of all, they thought he was their mayor, which he was not, and they really liked the job he was doing as their mayor, which he was not. So he's just kind of this kind of impressive political figure that I either admire and I'm frustrated by trying to understand it. But he weathered this storm last night in a way that Bennett couldn't, in a way that DeGette couldn't. Is this just him? Does this have to do with a somewhat weaker challenge from Julie Gonzalez? What's your take? And I ask this in particular because, if anyone politically, Hickenlooper is probably the most conservative Democrat running in the state. Maybe. I mean, he seems maybe more out of step with his party than most other incumbents. And yet,
not by
was
far.
able to.
I wouldn't say by far.
Okay.
I think a couple of things. Hickenlooper has far and away the most recognizable political name in Colorado. And that alone gets him a couple of points every election. Julie Gonzalez ran a terrible campaign.
Okay.
She raised about $1 million, did not do a significant media buy. Almost all of her money went to staff and consultants. And I kept seeing emails and text messages about her ground game. She was always walking doors in Denver. And, that was where she was comfortable. But, you need to go to Jeffco. You need to go to Arapahoe County. You need to go to Larimer County. You need to go, Jefferson County is the largest population center for votes in Colorado, not Denver. And I think at the end of the day, I come back to fundamentals matter. Hickenlooper is a very, very good campaigner. People like him and they recognize his name. And Julie Gonzalez just didn't do anything other than talk to the insiders in her own bubble.
What are the rules that Jason and I have about primaries? And I think it applies to this election perfectly, is you've got to make the case to fire before you make the case to hire. Quiros made the case to fire DeGette, right? She prosecuted that case successfully.
Yeah.
Julie Gonzalez said a lot of the same things and accused Hickenlooper of a lot of the same things that Quiros is accusing DeGette of, but it just didn't stick to him as much because of a lot of what Jason said. He has an enormous reservoir of goodwill built up in this state. He's never lost an election since 2002 when he ran for mayor the first time in Denver, and he was young enough to be jumping out of airplanes. He's in his 70s now, so I don't think he's skydiving as much. But it is important to recognize that, what Jason said is true about the fundamentals, but Hickenlooper also raised and spent $5 million largely on paid advertising, largely on reminding people who he was and why they liked him. And, he did that thing where you and I actually have talked about this on your show before, Seth, this candidates getting caught cussing thing, right? As a matter of authenticity.
Yes.
But it's cool because he didn't look at the camera and drop an F-bomb. The way they put it in the ad was he was at a town hall explaining something to a voter, and he just got so frustrated he couldn't help himself, and he dropped a bad word, which is the correct way to deliver that, by the way, if you're going to be forcing cusses in as a matter of attention seeking. To say nothing of the fact that it is worth pointing out another thing that Fish, who is always keeping us honest, put in the chat here, that Gonzalez is actually winning Denver by 5 points. But to Jason's point, it's not enough to run up the score in the city. You've got to play in the burbs, and
That's not where all the Democrats are. Yeah.
Jeffco, El Paso, Denver. That's where the votes are in this state. And if you get one and not the other two of those, like, you don't have the coalition to get to 50% plus one.
All right. Other thoughts on this race before we move on to another one?
This was,
I think it was overstated.
Really in doubt. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Because like we were reading things yesterday or 2 days ago that were saying like, will the socialist wave take out John Hickenlooper? And it's like, no. Like we thought DeGette was possible, and here we are, and 11 points like shocked us completely, of course. But like we never saw a world, because that would be a real like repudiation against all Washington forever, is if a state senator from Denver with a 5-1 cash disadvantage upsets a guy with as deep a well of political will as John Hickenlooper.
It would have meant the basics of campaigning no longer mattered, and that's not true.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's okay. This is really good to know. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Attorney General primary, where this was kind of an interesting four-way primary on the Democratic side. The person who has won this contest, who is I think pretty much always the leading candidate, is current Secretary of State Jenna Griswold. And there were essentially three other people challenging her: David Seligman, Michael Dougherty, and Hetal Doshi. Griswold I would think is fair to describe as a somewhat controversial figure within the state's Democratic Party, somewhat of a lightning rod. And I think there was a fair amount. It looked like a runaway race for her early just because of her name recognition advantage. But clearly there were some Democrats who were open to trying to take her down in this. And when you see the results, the fact that she is winning this with about 45% of the vote suggests that potentially one progressive candidate might have beat her, but you have this sort of failure of coordination where that anti-establishment vote went three ways. I'm curious what you think on this. Is this could a more coordinated opposition have actually prevented her from winning this?
I think Jenna Griswold is objectively, and this is not an opinion, objectively the least qualified of the four candidates for Attorney General. But she was also far and away the most well-known.
Mm-hmm.
I think a 1 versus 1 race, I think Griswold probably loses. But in a 4-way race, name ID carries the day entirely.
Couple things, push back on some of that. Jenna is actually very popular in the Democratic Party in Colorado. Like it or not, like when I see her talk at like the Jeffco dinner or whatever, people are on their feet. Like she can burn the place to the ground, and like people really do like her in the party because she gets caught trying and fighting a lot. Like if you ask any rank and file Democratic voter, like what about Jenna Griswold, they go, well, she beats the shit out of Donald Trump, and I like that. Yeah. And that's fair. I agree with
on national news frequently. Like, yes, every time he sends an attack her way, she gets on TV and responds, and she's very visible that way. And I think that's a lot of what Democrats want to see.
And you have to give her credit because like those can be scary altercations. Like when the president of the United States comes after you, your death threats go up, your inbox is a mess, like your phones in your office are ringing off the hook. People confront you in public. None of this is pleasant. So I think credit where it's due, but like to your point, 45.67% of the vote goes to her. 19.84 to Michael Dougherty, the Boulder DA, 18.33% to David Seligman, a sort of consumer rights attorney who runs a nonprofit, among other things, and then 16.16% to Hetal Doshi, the former DOJ antitrust attorney. We interviewed all three of those other candidates on our show and had a great conversation with them. Jenna wouldn't show up this time because she didn't think it was necessary, and she turned out to be right. I mean, I don't want to sort of reward this behavior because everyone should come do the Get More Smarter Gauntlet.
Obviously. But similarly, she did not participate in that many debates either, while the
She
others
didn't have
did.
to.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
second this was more than a two-person race, she was favored with 80 to 90% likelihood, and she knew it, and everybody around her knew it, and there was no reason for her to upset the apple cart. Now, whether that's good or bad for democracy, I think is a totally separate conversation that other people should have. But like the second it was, I think Doshi was the first to turn in her signatures, and then Doherty and Seligman and Jenna all qualified by assembly. That's when we knew. And I talked to a bunch of people around the other candidates, and they were all like, well, I'm the only one who can win, so the other two have to drop out. And all three of them thought that. And once that paralysis got baked in, there was no stopping her.
Right. That's you can't expect candidates to coordinate themselves, right? They all think they can win. It usually takes some outside Godfather type figure, and we don't have a ton of them working in politics these days. So,
well, and it was just a lower priority, I think, for a lot of people in an election where there were so many things on the ballot.
Yeah, and it wasn't like polarized at that like high stakes nature as CD1 ended up being, and even as the governor's race was, I think, eventually constructed, because any one of these folks is going to like get in there and try and like do Phil's routine against Trump. Right. In some way, shape, or form. And like, that's what people want out of the Colorado Attorney General right now, is just like sue the living shit out of these guys and stop them from all the stuff they want to do to us. And like, they will have varying levels of success in alternative universes, but like, I don't think anybody doubts for a second that Jenna's going to go in there and like not try and sue the living daylights out of Donald Trump every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that seems quite plausible. I think they'll be on similar pages with that. Okay. Final thoughts on the AG race?
Foregone conclusion once there were more than two other candidates not named Jenna Griswold in there. Yeah.
I want to touch on one race that, I largely know about it because I live in the district, so this is very Smotus specific. But there is a state house race in the 6th district. Incumbent House member Sean Camacho has lost the Democratic primary to Iris Halpern. And it was one of these very high spending primary races for a contest that I don't think most people could have named these candidates not too long ago. And Camacho is, I think, fairly left-leaning, has a good labor record, was targeted nonetheless by a bunch of labor unions, and, was defended by other groups, more moderate groups, but it wasn't clear to me why he was targeted. And why that worked. I think maybe we're talking about like the people that Melad Kiros brought out to the polls were also in this district, so that probably helped her to some extent. But I'm curious to the extent you were watching this contest, what your take on it was.
I think that was part of it. I think the people making the endorsements for the labor unions have a lot of them are sort of the activist folks also. So that helped Halpern. And Denver got weird this year. And, Camacho got caught in that.
A little more important context on this. So HD6 was a seat that Camacho took from a different incumbent in 2024. So in 2022, the person who was there before, maybe it was Lois Court, probably not. So, Chris Hansen, right? Someone will have to forgive me. Vacates the seat. Elizabeth Epps.
I'm not sure. Okay, yeah.
I can't remember, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm sorry. Elizabeth Epps ends up winning the primary against Katie March in 2022. Katie widely seen as like the more moderate candidate. Epps is like the more progressive fire breather. Even before October 7th, and we'll get into her sort of Israel-Gaza politics in a second here, Epps was like a police and prison abolitionist. And like during the 2019-2020 George Floyd sort of racial reckoning in this country and in Colorado and Denver in particular, was a big leader in that community. A lot of us in the progressive movement at the time like rallied around her and listened to her. And then when she got elected, I actually supported her in her first race in 2022. We were really, really excited. After October 7th, she decided that the Colorado state capitol was a good venue to like litigate the Israel-Palestine conflict, and ended up like shutting down the floor during a special session on property taxes and kind of just like making a big mess of things. So here comes Sean Camacho in 2024 as the sort of like Joe Biden, like, I'm going to make sure you don't have to think about HD6 anymore. like candidate and goes in there and beats Epps handily. Well, guess what? 2 years later, the more progressive side of the coin wants their turn back and goes after Camacho and beats him pretty handily. I mean, last night this thing was within a couple hundred votes, but as we sit here, is it up to 10 points at this moment? I don't quite know. It's kind of
It's like
something.
she's got like a 7-point lead at this point.
Yeah, so like that's
Yeah.
definitive, right? That's
Yeah.
determinative.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's like, I actually happen to like Sean Camacho a lot. I supported him. I thought he was doing a really good job. When I thought of Sean Camacho, he's labor and Tabor, like he's pro-labor, anti-Tabor,
Okay.
and that's like a good mix of issues for that district. But I think you nailed it with his like the new voters who got brought into the fold and then who were canvassed by DSA or New Era or Working Families Party or any of the other like big volunteer mobilization efforts that were going around in the district. It was straight ticket for this slate. And I think Iris and Kiros kind of ended up on the same side of that.
Okay. So what else? Those are roughly the races I wanted to run through. Were there others that either of you wanted to mention?
There were two.
Go.
Do you want to? There are two things that I thought were interesting. Beyond that, in the Republican race for Attorney General, a guy named David Wilson, who used to be an attorney for Tina Peters, got 40% of the vote, doing basically nothing. Michael Allen, the El Paso County District Attorney, is the Republican nominee. I don't know what to make of this other than the fact that, other than just Republicans are still in a very weird place. There's no real logical reason why this guy should get 40%, being like doing nothing, raising no money, just existing. And the other one that's interesting to me, I keep an eye on Dwayne Romero, the Democratic nominee for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. He won pretty handily in that Democratic primary, but what surprises me about that is he only joined the race in early March.
Mm-hmm.
Like days before the caucus and assembly nominating convention, which was his only path.
Literally about as late as you possibly could. Yeah.
We interviewed him the day after, and it was in the 48-hour period of announcing to running to getting on the ballot.
What it tells me, though, is that he, for whatever reason, clearly has a base of support in that district. To jump in a race that late and end up winning a primary that handily tells me there's something there for him. And it would make me very nervous if I was incumbent Republican Jeff Hurd.
And the guy who he won the primary against, Alex Keloff, had been in the race for a year plus, was like not objectionable. Like he wasn't wacky in one particular way.
He was a good candidate.
Deep roots down in the valley. His like great grandparents owned like a chain of grocery stores in Alamosa. We interviewed him for the show and Dwayne as well, and thought he was great. We thought they were both great. And we're like, hey, good news for CD3. Like whichever one of these Democrats wins is going to give. We call Jeff Hurd the bread sandwich because that's how interesting he is. A run for his money, and I agree that Dwayne will. I do want to just kind of take the opposite case of that and make a broader point to your question, Seth. Something that we've glanced at in this conversation but haven't directly addressed is just the utter political non-competitiveness of the Colorado Republican Party largely. Yeah. I think is also why you end up with a Democratic primary civil war in seats like 86 that are basically the person you send to.
This is where the decisions are happening right now. This is the election. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it also created the conditions for CD1's upset because without an incompetent Republican Party, the center of gravity of the Democratic Party stays more toward the middle and more toward the center left rather than going to the far left. But because Republicans have just been so utterly incompetent in winning general elections on the candidate level in Colorado for the last decade, basically, it allowed that Overton window and that center of gravity to shift pretty hard. And then in an environment like 2026, where you have national groups like Indivisible and 5051 and Working Families Party coming in and DSA and putting their thumb explicitly on the scale of certain races, it just opens up those opportunities that never existed before. Like I was the chief of staff to the Speaker of the House for 2 years. All of our caucuses, with the exception of like 2 members, were centrist, center-left Democrats because that's what you had to do to win competitive elections in Colorado for the decades between 2003 and 2018. no more. So it's going to be a very interesting thing to see this evolving, and whether or not other incumbents get challenges or people decide not to run for re-election because they don't like the way the vibe is moving in the party. I mean, Colorado is going through a very interesting gyration in terms of its future politics right now. But what is less interesting is that for the vast majority of elections were decided that will be voted on in November were decided last night. I want to give one more shout out to Jessica Killen down in Colorado Springs, who won her primary handily. Her opponent was sort of in the DSA mold and tried to run at her from the progressive left, and she stayed focused and stayed moderate. El Paso County, it's a district Democrats have never won in the history of its creation in Colorado. But she is going to give Jeff Crank, we have two Jeffs in Colorado's congressional delegation, a real run for his money. So keep an eye on Jessica Killen down in the 5th. I think she won that primary handily and is going to put a district that has really no business being in play on the map for the general this November. So that's where November will be interesting in the 3rd and in the 5th, but not really in any of the other races except for the 8th, which will just see its normal course of spending.
Thanks for that. And to your point, one of the things I find fascinating about Colorado's primary elections is that it's an all-mail ballot. Non-affiliated voters, people unaffiliated with either of the two major parties, can participate in this election. And essentially, if you're unaffiliated, you get both parties' ballots sent to you through the mail, and you get to decide which contest you want to vote in. You can't send both back. You have to pick one. And at least, so the numbers I've seen so far is that among unaffiliated voters, more than twice as many have sent back Democratic ballots than Republican ballots. And part of that is just, there's a lot, there were just more contests on the Democratic side. But also, like, this is also the governing party. And if you want to have an impact on the direction the state is going, this is really the contest you're going to weigh in on.
It's also that unaffiliated does not mean independent. We know that unaffiliated voters largely all over the country tend to vote more often than not straight ticket, one party or another. They just don't want to affiliate officially. That doesn't mean they're splitting their ticket up and down the ballot. That's not what happens normally.
And in Colorado, unless you are dying to spend every single Saturday in a sweaty gym through the month of April at a caucus assembly or a precinct caucus, there is basically no functional reason for you to join a party at this point unless you want to run for office yourself. Unaffiliateds, like you said, I only got my Democratic ballot. Jason only got his Democratic ballot. Unaffiliateds get sent both. They have to send one back. They can't do both. We get like a couple dozen, maybe 1,200 or so spoiled ballots statewide because of that fact every year. But they are the largest party. Unaffiliated voters at 52% registration or so are the largest party in Colorado, and they turned
largest affiliate because they're not a party.
That's the right way to say it. And they turned out and made the difference in races. And to Jason's point, it wasn't that the unaffiliateds moderated the ticket. Quite the opposite, right? Because you have these events like CD1 where a very far left candidate defeats a 30-year incumbent. So I agree that unaffiliated doesn't mean moderate or independent. It means either I want more choices, or I was automatically registered and didn't pick a party because I don't have to, or, well, I kind of hate them both, but I'll vote in the one that's more meaningful. I have a friend who is a former Republican elected official who is unaffiliated now, who called me and said, what primary should I vote in? And I said, the one that matters, which is the Democratic. And that's, that was the vibe.
Fair. Although a chance to vote for Victor Marx, man, I don't know. You got to think about that. Yeah. Question for you I'm just looking at some of the voter turnout reports. This looks to be, I think, on par with turnout in 2022. Obviously, higher turnout on the Democratic side this year than on the Republican side. But any surprises there? Was this a higher, lower turnout contest than you expected? Is this more energetic, less energetic?
This is what I would have thought. Because you've got, it's one of those years that only happens so often where all these statewide seats are open. And so that creates more opportunities, more candidates. It makes sense. 2024, there wasn't much on the ballot for Democrats. So there was much less reason to vote in the primary.
Mm-hmm. So here's what I'll say. Colorado kicks ass at voting. We make it super easy. We send everyone a ballot basically a month before the election. There are drop boxes everywhere. If you drop it in the mail with a stamp, it gets delivered. If you happen to forget your stamp, it gets delivered. Like, we are
But don't
very
tell
good.
anyone that. Don't. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, don't like cost the postal service too much money on purpose. Like, please just add the stamp or go. Like, the drop boxes
Yeah.
are absolutely everywhere. You cannot walk a
Yeah.
dog without coming across 3 of
No,
them in any part of the state.
it is super easy to vote. Yeah.
So Colorado normally gets in the 80s, high 80s, low 90s in terms of general election turnout. 30.1 or 30.9% was the primary turnout statewide as of this recording. That'll probably tick up to 31% at the end of it. So, yes, it's 1.2 million votes out of an active 4 million voter pool, but 30% is not 50%, 60%, or 90%, right? It is not representative, but it is also not super duper unusually high turnout, right? Like, if you go back to the 2020 primary or the 2022 primary, just to try and like answer your question, the 2020 primary, yes, it was a presidential, but we vote for presidential primaries on a different ballot than we vote for other primaries in Colorado because we are so fun. That was 45% turnout, so a full 15 points higher in the presidential year. And then in 2022, it was 32%, so it was 1 point higher. So to Jason's point, it tracks basically with the 2022, but I do think that it was more pronounced in Denver, and you had a higher Denver turnout in CD1 than you ever had before because the race was competitive for the first time.
And Republicans had nothing going on for the most part. So that hurt turnout overall as well. There was much less reason for a Republican to even bother.
Right. If you look at CD1 in 2022, when Neil Walia lost to DeGette 81-18, like these are the margins that she was used to, there were 97,000 votes cast in that contest. Last night, 132,000. That is a big jump.
Okay. So I guess I'd love to move. I guess I have a last question for you. Is just basically, can you summarize last night? We talked about a lot of very specific things to different races, about different candidates, but what's your overall takeaway? If you were writing the Denver Post headlines this morning, what would you have on there?
So we have this like fast food burrito restaurant in Colorado called Santiago's, and they have
they're great. They're great.
They're great.
Yeah.
And they have my favorite order is the half and half, which is half spicy green chili and half regular red chili. I would say it's a half and half burrito night where you had some pretty expected outcomes like Hickenlooper, Griswold. Phil was an upset, but like most of us thought that was a likelihood, if not a lock, like going into last night or in the last couple weeks. So I'd say like there were a few surprises, but like more than not, Colorado performed about what you would expect in a backlash to Trump year with a bunch of primaries on the ballot. Jason, is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And my big takeaway is still that the fundamentals matter. You still have to run competent, strong campaigns. You still have to do paid media. You can't just organize your way to victory. That's not how it works. There are a lot of analysts going to be talking about, are the progressives pushing ahead? Are what is Heroes to get say overall about Democrats? I still come back to, you run a good campaign, you tend to win.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm tending to look at this a little more in terms of like national tide than you all are, and it's something I attempt to do.
Sure.
But it was, there's some sort of populist or progressive wave going on. It's stronger than we've seen in a while. You had some skilled incumbents who were able to weather that, and some that weren't. And there's stories there. I mean, there's information in the error term there about like candidate strength and some situational things. But it's a rough environment for both Republicans and Democratic incumbents right now.
Well, can I ask you a question? Even though
you
this
may
is
ask me a question. Yeah.
So you study this stuff more than us, and maybe this is fair and maybe this is not, but there's a lot of talk about the Democratic Tea Party. And are we seeing the Democratic Tea Party arise all these decades later? I mean, you saw that run up after Obama was elected, 09, 10. You have this big throw the bums out, bunch of upstarts, primary, a bunch of incumbents. And this goes on for a decade. I mean, Lauren Boebert primaries and wins against Scott Tipton in 2020, where people feel like she's been around forever, but it was only 3 cycles ago.
Yeah.
Is this the same pattern emerging on the left? Is it different? What's similar? Like when you study parties, like is this just the natural sort of cyclical course of what happens when you win and lose and win like this, and or is there something else going on?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I have been sort of trying to frame this year in terms of, is this finally the Tea Party of the left? The last Tea Party of the left moment we had was 2018, where it actually turned out it didn't yield as many successes as the Republican Tea Party did. Like for the most part, the Democratic Party protected its incumbents. There were obviously a handful of exceptions with AOC, with some squad members, but it was not a huge number of people transforming the party, even though they did flex some muscle. My impression is that this year is a stronger progressive year than that. And we've saw some upset wins in New York. We've seen a few here in Colorado. I think we're going to see some elsewhere as the summer goes on. I don't think we're talking about anywhere near the numbers that we saw among Tea Partiers in like 2010 and 2012, where I think like there was something like 70 new members of Congress with Tea Party affiliation. We're not looking at anything remotely that large. So I think it's a moment, but I don't think it's going to take over the party in the way that happened.
The progressives picked up a lot of low-hanging fruit this year. DeGette was the weakest member of Congress in Colorado. A lot of their big wins came in Denver, which is the most fertile ground for a left-wing kind of insurgent. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much it expands beyond that.
Yeah, but what I was trying to get at a minute ago is that the Tea Party did come in waves and cycles, right? You had like the first 08, 9, 10 Tea Party, then you had like a resurgence in 14, then you had Trump. Like, I don't think you get to Trump without the Tea Party. Like, you can draw a straight line from that anti-establishmentarianism to the outsider celebrity candidate eating and taking over the party. I don't think we're going to see the same exact thing on the left, but I do wonder if this is like year one and not like the final form of whatever this takes, right?
That's possible. I mean, I sort of trace this as like, I think we're in the middle of something that probably started with Occupy Wall Street, and then the Sanders campaign in 2016, and then 2018. So like, this is, I think that movement is growing. It has some strength. You're right that this may be going on to a long time, and the culmination is President Hassan Piker or something like that. I have no idea. But yeah, I think in some ways this is a high tide year. I don't know that it will be like this in 2028, but I'm curious how this moment will inform the presidential race, right? This is probably, emboldening the left of the party somewhat. And there's a lot of people seeing this who are saying, maybe this is the year for me to run for president. And then somehow we get 24 people. But yeah, we'll see.
I think the only thing you can count on is a crowded field. Right.
Yeah.
And you can count on a crowded field trying to fight Trump because Trump produces political chaos and crowded fields come from chaotic situations.
Yeah, totally agree. Guys, I want to thank you so much for participating in this. Again, folks, if you are not following them, again, they are at Ian and Jason are at the Get More Smarter podcast. I'm posting a link to Get More Smarter in the chat here. I really hope you'll check them out and listen to them. It is a very good podcast, and I'm saying it not just because I've been on occasionally. But this has been a great collaboration. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you all who tuned in today. And Jason and Ian, thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. This was really a lot of fun. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We talked to like a couple hundred people today. This was great.
We did. It's wild. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.